Before the alarms, before the sky split open with the roar of an F-16, no one was authorized to fly. There was only the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet rhythm of a mop gliding across concrete. An ordinary sound masking the extraordinary truth that would soon swallow Falcon Air Base whole. If you're the kind of person who believes some legends don't stay buried, who senses when a story is about to tilt from normal into unbelievable, then go ahead and like and subscribe now, because what unfolded that night defied every rule, every expectation, and every limitation the uniformed world thought it understood. On the surface, it began with nothing more dramatic than a general in a hurry and a young woman the entire base had collectively agreed to overlook, though she carried herself with the kind of disciplined stillness you only see in soldiers who have spent more time under fire than under sunlight. Staff Sergeant Lena Rios, though no one on Falcon Air Base knew her real former rank, and certainly not her past, moved through the hangar like someone who had memorized every echo, every dust particle swirling in the beam of a ceiling lamp, every shift of pressure in the air when a door opened or closed. She was 28, quietly competent, dressed in the plain Navy coveralls issued to civilian cleaners, and in every way unremarkable except for the fact that she somehow managed to be the only person in any room who never felt out of place no matter how aggressively others tried to make her invisible. That evening, General Halstead swept through the hangar with a trail of visiting officers clicking behind him, all of them eager to witness the new upgrades to the Wing's F-16C fleet. Halstead was a man who carried command like a weapon, sharp, heavy, and always drawn, and he barely noticed the cleaning staff as he walked, except when one happened to be in the way. "Someone clean this up before we have a foreign dignitary slip and sue us," he barked, gesturing toward a spill near the nose of an F-16. Then, spotting Lena within arm's reach of the mess, he threw out a comment he thought would amuse the brass. Or hell, maybe the cleaner can fly the F-16 once she's done mopping. Might do better than some of my pilots. Laughter rolled through the group like a cheap echo. Lena paused, but only for a fraction of a breath, then dipped her head in polite acknowledgement, the kind that neither agreed nor submitted. She simply resumed her work. Captain Avery, trailing behind the group, caught the barely there shift of her posture, a change so subtle he wondered if he'd imagined it entirely. Something about the way she held the mop, balanced lightly in her right hand, her left foot angled behind her like she was always ready to pivot, made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. It was the posture of someone who'd spent years clearing corners, not cleaning them. But the general kept walking, and the visiting officers kept laughing, and Avery told himself he was reading too much into a stranger's stance. After all, a cleaner was just a cleaner. The hangar quieted again after the entourage left, settling back into the steady hum and the soft clinks of cooling metal. Lena continued her work with the same precision she did everything else, her movements deliberate but never wasted. The truth was woven into every inch of her being, into the way she moved, breathed, listened, but no one on the base was paying close enough attention to see it. That was the point. The Air Force had taught her long ago that the best place to hide was right in front of men who believed they could spot danger from 100 miles out, yet somehow couldn't see the storm standing a few feet from them with a mop. When General Halstead returned unexpectedly an hour later, the hangar was nearly empty. He stopped mid-stride when he saw her alone, methodically wiping down the base of a maintenance trolley, her back straight, her focus absolute. "Still here?" he asked, partly annoyed, partly impressed. "Dedicated." Lena looked up with eyes too old for her age. "Just doing my job, sir." As she reached up to set aside a rack, her sleeves shifted just enough to reveal the barest glimpse of ink. A small black tattoo on her inner forearm, so quick and faint it could have been a trick of the light. But the general saw it. A serpent wrapped around a pair of stylized wings. He blinked. That symbol wasn't something anyone outside of deep clearance programs would ever recognize. Yet he did. Everyone above a certain level did. The Peregrine Unit, a classified special operations flight program buried beneath layers of redaction so thick, most junior officers believed it was nothing more than a hallway myth. 7 pilots had ever earned that mark. Each one had vanished into the vaults of history, presumed dead, missing, or so deeply embedded in covert operations that even speaking their names aloud was discouraged. Halstead stared. Lena tugged her sleeve down without hurry, without embarrassment, without any attempt to hide the mark beyond the simple motion itself, as if it were second nature, as if she'd done it thousands of times. "Where did you get that?" he demanded, more sharply than intended. The hanger felt suddenly colder. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with a calm that was almost unnerving. "Don't worry, sir," she said, her voice smooth, quiet, and unshaken. "You weren't briefed on me." He opened his mouth to respond, confusion tightening his jaw, when the base alarm tore through the air like a serrated blade. A mechanical voice cracked over the loudspeaker. "Scramble alert. Unscheduled takeoff authorization requested. Downed aircraft over training range 7. Pilot possibly alive. Rescue bird too far out. Any available pilot to report immediately." Halstead froze. Lena didn't. She looked toward the idle F-16 sitting on standby, its nose pointed toward the open hangar doors like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Halstead followed her gaze, then looked back at her, and in that brief second, before either of them spoke, before the night unraveled into impossible truth, he understood two things at once. First, that the cleaner wasn't a cleaner, and second, that he had just made the greatest joke and the greatest mistake of his entire career. Lena Rios was already moving toward the fighter jet, and nothing on earth was going to stop her. General Halstead's mind was still reeling from the glimpse of the tattoo when Lena Rios reached the F-16 like she had been carved from the very shadows of the hangar itself, her movements economical, precise, and impossibly confident for someone whose employment file, if anyone bothered to check it, listed nothing but basic custodial duties and a civilian background that raised no red flags. The hangar lights flickered overhead as if even the building sensed the shift in the air, the way the atmosphere thickened with something electric and predatory. Halstead took a step forward, torn between stopping her and demanding answers. But something about the way her hands brushed the fuselage, familiar, reverent, expertly placed, froze him in his tracks. "What are you doing?" he managed, though the question sounded weak even to his own ears. Lena didn't look back. Instead, she inspected the intake, the landing gear, the surface panels, every touch revealing a fluency that no one gained by watching aircraft from the sidelines. "They'll waste precious minutes arguing over who gets authorization," she said calmly, as though commenting on the weather. "The pilot doesn't have minutes." Halstead opened his mouth to protest, but the radio crackled again, this time with panic woven through the static. "Eagle 2 is still transmitting. Weak signal. Possible hypoxia. Condition deteriorating. Need immediate extraction or assistance." A cold blade of fear slid down Halstead's spine. The downed pilot was one of his best, a friend's son, a promising officer who had barely started his career. He imagined that young airman bleeding out in the desert night while the brass hesitated, buried in procedure and pride. Lena swung the access ladder into place with a single fluid motion. "You can't possibly think," Halstead began, but his voice faltered as she climbed with an ease that made the impossible suddenly feel inevitable. Each rung seemed to peel back another layer of the lie she'd worn since arriving at Falcon Air Base. She didn't climb like a cleaner. She climbed like someone who had lived her life inside these machines. When she reached the cockpit, the final veil fell away. She lowered herself inside and shut the canopy halfway, leaving just enough open to speak, though her hands were already dancing over the controls, flipping switches and sequences Halstead recognized only because he had watched his pilots do it thousands of times. But they never moved like she did. Fast, sure, unflinching. "You need to stop," he said, but it lacked conviction. Because he knew if she stopped, the pilot would die. And because he knew, deep in the marrow of his bones, that she belonged inside that cockpit more than half the pilots he'd commissioned. Lena met his eyes for the first time since she'd slipped the mop from her grasp, and in that brief, piercing look, Halstead saw the thing he had been too blind, too arrogant, too self-assured to recognize. This woman was not ordinary. She was not untrained. She was not an imposter. She was a ghost the Air Force had buried, intentionally or not. "You shouldn't know that startup sequence," he whispered. "You shouldn't know any of this." The jet's displays flickered to life, bathing her face in pale blue glow, illuminating features that suddenly looked much harder, older, and infinitely more haunted than her 28 years should have allowed. "I wasn't supposed to be here at all," she replied, her voice steady but edged with something like sorrow. "But when you walk away from a unit like mine, they don't always let you go. Sometimes the only way to survive is to disappear in plain sight." Halstead could barely breathe. "Peregrine," he said softly, the word escaping before he could stop it. Lena didn't confirm or deny it. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything. His pulse slammed against his ribs. "Peregrine Unit." The Air Forces whispered about Ghost Squadron, the one that flew missions so classified entire. War rooms were emptied before the reports were delivered. Pilots recruited young, pushed hard, hidden behind layers of redaction so deep it was unclear whether they were protecting secrets or protecting the world from the truths those pilots had seen. And according to every internal record he'd ever been cleared to read, Peregrine Unit had lost its final operative 3 years ago in a catastrophic mission gone dark. That operative was 25. Female. Status, deceased. Except she wasn't. She was sitting in his F-16. Halstead staggered back, the enormity of it all pressing down on him. "You died," he said, the words tasting like disbelief. "Everyone thought. Your team. Your commander. They said the wreckage was convincing." She finished for him. That was the point. She flipped 2 more switches, and the engine whine deepened into a powerful rumble that vibrated through the hangar floor. Every instinct in Halstead screamed to stop her. Chain of command, regulations, security protocols. But another instinct, older and sharper, whispered a truth he could no longer deny. She was the only one who could save that pilot. "If you take off without clearance, they'll court-martial you," he warned, though even he knew how hollow it sounded. Lena gave a faint, humorless smile. "General, they can't court-martial a ghost." Before he could respond, she pulled the canopy down with a final, echoing click. The hangar filled with wind and thunder as the F-16 roared to life, trembling like a beast straining against its leash. Halstead stepped back, shielding his eyes from the blast wash, watching in stunned awe as the woman he'd dismissed as a cleaner brought a multi-million-dollar aircraft online faster than pilots with hundreds of logged hours. Over the radio, panicked chatter continued. Eagle 2 fading, vitals unstable, time running out. Lena taxied forward, the jet pivoting with deadly purpose toward the open runway. Just before she launched, her voice crackled through the external speaker, calm and resolute. "Falcon Tower. This is Peregrine 6. Initiating emergency response intercept." Silence slammed the hangar. The call sign alone was enough to freeze every breath. Then came the reply, weak, stunned, disbelieving. "Peregrine 6, that call sign, is retired." Lena's hands tightened around the throttle. "Not tonight." And with that, she pushed forward, the F-16 shrieking down the runway and erupting into the sky like a resurrection no one alive had expected to witness again. General Halstead stood rooted to the concrete, the realization settling like thunder in his chest. He hadn't watched a cleaner steal a jet. He had just watched the Air Force's most impossible legend come back from the dead. And whatever came next, the entire world was about to feel it. The night swallowed Lena Rios as the F-16 climbed like something born from the dark, cutting through the atmosphere with such violent purpose it felt as if the jet itself remembered her, welcomed her, had been waiting in dormancy for the only pilot whose hands had once made it defy physics. In the control tower, confusion turned into alarm, then into something far stranger. Silence, the kind that settles when people realize the world is shifting in front of them, and everything they believed in has just been rearranged without their permission. Radar tracked her ascent, observers murmuring in disbelief as her signature appeared with the bold clarity of a vengeful star. General Halstead stood outside the hangar, the wind from her departure still kicking grit across the concrete, as if the earth hadn't fully settled after her takeoff, and he watched the shrinking flame of her afterburner with the kind of eye usually reserved for miracles or disasters. He wasn't sure which this one would become. High above, Lena's breathing steadied into the rhythm of memory, the old cadence, the one she'd sworn she'd left behind in exchange for anonymity and a life made small enough to survive. Beneath her, the desert stretched endlessly, a black ocean dotted with silver shards of starlight and the distant flicker of the downed pilot's emergency beacon. Over the radio, weak static crackled. Eagle 2. Anyone? Oxygen failing. The young man's voice trembled with fading coherence. And Lena pushed the F-16 harder, shaving seconds off the approach until the G-force pinned her to the seat, pulling at old injuries and forgotten scars. She found the wreck, half buried in sand, cockpit skewed at a sickening angle, and executed a maneuver so precise it bordered on reckless, dropping low enough to make the ground tremble beneath the jet's roar. Eagle 2. I have your position, she said calmly, her voice steady as a surgeon's hand. Stay awake. I'm not leaving you. The words echoed eerily, the same phrase she had spoken 3 years ago over enemy mountains, moments before the explosion that the Air Force believed had killed her. The pilot choked out a response, barely audible. Lena circled the wreck, calling in coordinates with expert authority, guiding a rescue team still 20 miles out, buying the young man precious minutes with her voice and presence alone. But as she orbited, the situation worsened, a sandstorm rising on the horizon, winds shifting violently, obscuring visibility. No rescue helicopter could cut through that safely. She had to improvise. She lowered altitude again, dangerously, until she flew so close the jet's turbulence blew sand away from the canopy of the downed aircraft, giving the trapped pilot a pocket of air he could breathe more easily. It was insane, impossible, brilliant. Inch by inch, she held the F-16 steady, her hands moving with an instinct no simulator could replicate, her nerves wired not to the aircraft but to the young life below her. The rescue team finally arrived, their radio calls filled with disbelief as they watched the lone fighter jet hovering in lethal proximity, shielding the pilot with controlled wind shear like a guardian angel made of steel and fire. They extracted the pilot, barely conscious, barely alive, and once Lena confirmed he was safe aboard their aircraft, she pulled the F-16 up, punching through a wall of storm winds with a maneuver that should have torn the wings clean off. Back at base, the runway erupted with activity. Security vehicles, MPs, command staff, and more brass than a parade day forming an uneasy semicircle around the tarmac. Halstead stood at the center, his face pale, not with fear of repercussions, but with the gravity of what he had just witnessed. A legend resurrected, a ghost made flesh, a secret the Air Force had tried to bury now screaming across the sky for all to hear. Lena landed the jet with a softness that belied the storm she had flown through, taxiing toward the crowd with the slow, predatory glide of someone who no longer needed to hide who she was. The cockpit opened. For a suspended moment, no one moved. Then General Halstead approached her alone, each step heavy with the weight of questions he wasn't sure he had the right to ask. Lena stood atop the ladder, helmet tucked under her arm, moonlight catching the faint lines of exhaustion and defiance etched onto her young, yet battle-aged face. I should arrest you, Halstead began quietly, for stealing a military jet, violating protocol, breaking classified cover, and a dozen other things your file doesn't admit exist. Lena nodded once. I know. Then he looked at her, truly looked, and let out a low, unsteady breath. But I watched you save a pilot tonight in a way no one else on Earth could have. And I heard a call sign that hasn't been spoken in years. His voice softened, as though speaking to a relic of a war the world never knew. Peregrine 6, why come back now? Her gaze drifted toward the dark horizon where the rescue team had vanished, and for the first time since she'd returned to the sky, something vulnerable flickered in her eyes. Because ghosts get tired of running, she said. Because I never wanted to disappear. I just wanted to stop losing people. Tonight, someone needed me, and I couldn't stay hidden. Halstead stared, the truth settling deep into him like a stone thrown into water. Heavy, permanent, impossible to ignore. You know they'll come for you, he warned. Your old unit. Intelligence. Command. They'll want answers. They'll want to own you again. Lena stepped down onto the runway, the hum of the cooling jet behind her sounding almost like an exhale of relief. They can try, she said, her voice low but unbreakable. But I'm not the same ghost they buried. She turned to walk past him, and though Halstead knew the world above him was shifting, command structures, classified programs, political fallout, he also knew one thing with absolute certainty. The night's events would become legend, a story whispered through hangars and war rooms for generations. And at the center of it would be the cleaner who wasn't a cleaner, the dead pilot who wasn't dead, the woman who flew an F-16 into an impossible storm because she refused to let another life slip away. Lena Rios, Peregrine 6, had returned, and nothing in the sky or on the ground would ever be the same again.